I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent
I move to suspend so much of standing orders.
No, order. Members on my...
It's only Monday, but things were already getting a little testy in both chambers of federal parliament this morning.
The Leader of the Opposition has moved this motion today because the man is irresponsible and a sook.
The main story of the whole CFMEU saga of lawlessness, of thuggery, of corruption has of course been the absolute failings within the CFMEU, the damage it's caused to the building and construction industry, and of course the shameful neglect of the Labor Party.
And it didn't seem to be improving as the House moved into question time at 2 p.m.
The Prime Minister was also tricky in saying the screening processes his government uses are the same as the Coalition used, when that turns out to be completely untrue. Isn't this why Australians are disappointed in the Prime Minister and now saying that he's incompetent and dishonest?
I just want to deal with character descriptions in general, OK? Just so that everyone is crystal clear, including the Leader of the Opposition, if you put a character description at the end of the question, it's going to be ruled out of order.
The political temperature has clearly been rising over the past week. There has been ugly heckling, and the question of whether the Coalition's approach to Gaza constitutes or inflames racism has now come out into the parliamentary open.
We heard you in silence. You can hear me in silence.
Order.
Stop being racist.
The most entitled politicians in the parliament, and there's calling Peter Dutton racist for what? Making a suggestion about our national security.
But even as the polls show a relentless erosion of the government standing with voters, the parliamentary agenda seems to be going nowhere. Expectations that the government would move to ban gambling advertising in the current session have evaporated for now. As it has become increasingly clear that the government would not pursue a blanket ban, but pursue much less ambitious changes, there has been backbench dissent and outrage from anti-gambling lobbyists over indications that the government briefed opponents of a blanket ban weeks ago, while the Labor caucus remains in the dark. Legislation that is before the Parliament right now seems stuck or at the mercy of Senate demands. A deal struck late this afternoon means legislation on appointing an administrator to the construction division of the CFMEU will now proceed, with coalition amendments. But a crucial overhaul of the NDIS so far remains elusive.
One of those very clear goals is to ensure that the CFMEU in administration is not to incur any form of political campaign expenditure or make party political donations.
With the legislation up for debate not going very far, the fate of a whole raft of other bills, from aged care reform to changes to the Reserve Bank Act and caps on political spending and donations, seem particularly uncertain. But today, the claims and counterclaims about the way the government has dealt with people fleeing Gaza and the coalition suggestion that this has involved a national security risk has remained the dominant source of heat.
Was security advice sought from ASIO before the government made the unprecedented decision to grant tourist visas to people from the Gaza war zone?
No matter where a person comes from or what visa they hold, our security agencies are involved in the process. We trust their expertise. We take the same advice from the same security agencies.
Given the coalition is claiming the government's actions in issuing visitor visas to those escaping Gaza is unprecedented, it is worth going back to a Senate estimates hearing in May.
How many humanitarian stay subclass 449 visas have been offered to people fleeing Gaza?
The answer is zero. That visa has not been made available to Palestinians. The visitor visa is the visa available to individuals.
How many 449 visas were granted to people fleeing Ukraine?
In the situation for individuals fleeing Ukraine, again, visitor visas were used in that instance.
So people seeking to get out of Gaza were given exactly the same visitor visas as those who had fled Ukraine under the former government. Those fleeing Afghanistan were given humanitarian visas. The visitor visas used in Ukraine and Gaza have no working or other rights for people coming to Australia.
During their entire time in office, they issued, under the former government, more than 1,000 visitor visas to Palestinians from the occupied Palestinian territories. Apparently, under this Leader of the Opposition, thinks that Hamas became bad on October 7th. And before then, they were okay. It was all hunky-dory. their hypocrisy is just extraordinary.
The Gaza visa brawl has become an ugly conflagration of claims and counterclaims about precedents, suggestions that national security has been compromised, suggestions that ASIO has been left out of the loop of assessing visa holders, as well as what critics say is the opposition using the issue in a highly divisive way. The brutal politics, though, is that Peter Dutton's framing of Gaza has been depriving the government of oxygen to talk about any other issue, and until today it has been making hard work of both refuting the substance of his claims or mounting a counter-offensive on his political tactics. That job fell to the Leader of the House, Tony Burke.
He's got form on trying to divide the Australian community. Yep, look at who he said he won't fight for. Look at who he said we should all be suspicious of.
The Leader of the Nationals.
At the moment, we've got a debate where he's wanting to go after Palestinians, but before that it was Africans, it was Lebanese, it was Muslims. Granted, he hasn't tried to declare war on every migrant community. He did stand up for white South African farmers. We remember that.
Order.
We've just heard the Leader of the House going on for several minutes, attributing a whole range of improper motives to the Leader of the Opposition.
What might seem like a great way for some people to get a headline, none of us should underestimate the harm it does not just to those individuals but to the fabric of the nation.
Until now, the government has tried to argue the substance of the case on Gaza, but Tony Burke has made clear it is now gloves off on Peter Dutton and what his motives might be.